Chapter 6. Making Frames. Methods appropriate for the certified framer. Candidates for GCF should be able to make frames that are a correct interpretation of the design, function, cost and time requirements as set out in the written job sheet. Candidates must be able to work with the maximum economy of materials and time. They must be able to recognize and reject faulty materials and select materials of the appropriate strength and quality for each job. Finished frames must be blemish-free. Cuts must be clean, straight and accurate. There must be sufficient clearance for the expansion of materials and frames must be structurally sound. Candidates are expected to know enough about various types of artwork to enable them to select the most appropriate method for attaching the artwork to its undermount, e.g., dry mounting, conservation hinging. Artwork must be positioned correctly, must be free from stretch, distortion, or damage, and must be securely attached. As stated in the introduction, there is rarely only one way of carrying out framing techniques. GCF examiners will not dismiss a technique as being wrong so long as the end result is a demonstration of its success and the technique is safe. An example of a common differing of technique is the order in which framers work. Some start by cutting and assembling the moulding, while others leave this until the end and fit it around the glazing, window mount, etc. The order in which framers carry out the final assembly of the frame also varies. Some start by placing the backboard on the workbench and others start with the glazing. Cutting and assembling the moulding. 1. Remember that the length of moulding needed will be greater than the size of the window mounts to allow for the mitered corners. The amount needed for the corners will be the moulding width times 8. 2. The artwork, window mount, backboard, etc. must not fit tightly into the rebate of the moulding as they need to be able to expand and contract with atmospheric changes. If they do fit tightly, the frame is in danger of breaking or bending as they expand. Most framers allow between 1 mm and 2 mm clearance between the rebate of the moulding and the glazing. As an example, if the overall size of the glazing is 200 by 300 mm, the rebate size should be 202 by 302 mm. 3. It is sensible to cut the long sides first. If a mistake occurs, e.g. the mitre is not clean and needs recutting, the piece of moulding can be reused for the short sides. Check that the first length you cut is the correct size as you do not wish to duplicate mistakes. 4. Having cut 2 adjoining mitres, you should check that they will join closely. The GCF examiners will not allow gaps. 5. Before assembly, you should check that the cuts are clean and smooth. Usually, it is a good idea to colour the edges of mitres using appropriate materials. 6. Next, apply a film of wood glue to the cut mitres. Most framers glue the mitres in place with wood glue before underpinning, though some manufacturers state that gluing is superfluous, especially for small frames. The argument for gluing is that underpinning wedges hold the mitres in position, but that over time the weight of the glass and other components will push the mitres apart. If the frame is properly glued, this is much less likely to happen. 7. You must, of course, join a long side with a short side to create a rectangular frame. To avoid confusion, it is best to have a system to which everyone in the workshop adheres, e.g., always have the long side to the left and the short side to the right when joining 2 pieces of moulding. There is then only one way of joining the last 2 corners. 8. The exact positioning of the wedges and the size and quantity depends upon the moulding design. If wedges are too close to the outside edge, they may either split the moulding or open the mitre. Figure 19. Wedges must not, of course, cause a bump to appear on the surface of the moulding. You must consider the thickness and density of the wood and the size of wedge required, and aim to insert the wedges at the thickest point of the moulding first. The pressure, particularly in the case of pneumatic underpinners, should be adjusted to prevent the wedges going in either too far or not far enough. On some tool mouldings, it will be necessary to stack wedges. Be careful about the positioning when stacking, as wedges have a tendency to curve outwards. 9. Once the frame has been joined, you must remove any excess glue from the front and back of the moulding. Wait for the glue to dry before handling the frame further. When joining certain moulding designs, it may be necessary to use a reverse, i.e., two mitered and joined pieces of moulding of an opposite shape. Without the reverse, such mouldings tend to gap when underpinned. The reverse is placed upside down on top of the two pieces being joined to hold them firmly and evenly in place. Cutting window mounts. Candidates must be able to produce window mounts with no undercutting, overcutting or hooking. Window apertures must be cut accurately to within 1 mm of the required size. The outer perimeter of window mounts must be accurately cut. Candidates will not be examined on cutting ovals, fancy corners, etc. All mount cutters require the use of a slip mat. This can be an offcut of mount board or a silicone type mat that is placed under the mount being cut so that the tip of the blade sinks into it. Without a slip mat, it will be hard to create a cleanly cut window aperture. Blades should be changed regularly. If hand cutting a mount, the first signs of a blade becoming blunt are a slight crushed appearance at the start of the beveled edge and the extra effort in pulling or pushing the cutting head of the mount cutter. Double and multiple mounts. Double and multiple mounts help to distance the artwork from the glazing. Figure 20. This function is particularly useful in the case of original artwork with migrant pigments such as pastels and chalk drawings. Without multiple mounts or spacers, the pigments could migrate to the glass. The distance which lower mounts project beyond the top mount is a question of taste and design, though a reveal of 5 mm on all four sides is common. Most framers use the same width of reveal for each layer in a multiple mount, though this too is a matter of design. When cutting multi-layer mounts on a CMC, the outside edges of each layer of window mount are cut to the same size. When cutting by hand, the top mount becomes the edge guide, and the secondary mounts will need to be cut fractionally smaller. Multi-aperture mounts. Measuring and cutting these is straightforward if, for example, 3 photographs of the same size are to be framed. If artworks are of varying sizes, a little more thought is required. Figure 21. There are no hard and fast rules for working out window mount proportions. It is largely a matter of personal taste. Start by laying out the pieces of artwork and arranging them in various formations until you and your customer are happy. However, it generally looks best if the space between the apertures is narrower than the outer borders. Spaces between apertures should not be so narrow that there is a risk of their being torn or damaged. Remember, when drawing out a non-symmetrical arrangement of apertures, that it should be a mirror image on the back. When cutting by hand, the aperture positions need to be carefully drawn on the back of the mount board before cutting. Considerable concentration is necessary to ensure that all the beveled edges are cut sloping the right way. Mount cutter automatic stops cannot usually be used on multi-aperture mounts. Drawing lines on window mounts. Candidates must be able to accurately mark the corners of mount decorating lines and draw lines which must be parallel, accurate and evenly applied. Pencil or pin markings must not be easily detectable on the finished item. The purpose of mount decorating lines is to subtly complement and enhance artwork. They should not dominate the artwork or attract the viewer's eye. Rather, they should help to draw the eye from the frame and into the artwork. There are no rules regarding the combination of colours and number of lines, since such matters are a question of taste and design. However, some general guidelines can be provided. Lines should be drawn close to the window aperture, leaving most of the window mount free from decoration of any kind. It is widely accepted that more extensive decoration looks messy and starts to dominate the artwork. A standard formula is that a maximum of 40% of the window mount, that closest to the artwork, can be decorated, but that the remaining 60% should be left plain. Listed below are some popular lining combinations. A single line is a perennially popular simple lining technique. This is usually drawn between 5mm and 15mm away from the start of the bevel, depending upon the size of the artwork. If a single line is required, this is often gold or reflects one of the main or contrast colours in the artwork. A single black line looks best if there is quite a bit of black in the image, otherwise it appears too strong. Two lines in the same colour. This often takes the form of a thin inner line about 1 centimetre away from the bevel, with a thicker outer line approximately 2 to 5mm beyond this. These lines are usually drawn in colours that are subtle, pale reflections of the colours in the artwork. Multiple lines. If 3 or more lines are required, the distance between these should increase the further they are from the artwork. This helps to draw the eye inwards towards the artwork. Some guidelines for drawing lines using a ruling pen. 1. Ensure that your board is properly sized. Before starting to draw lines, you will need to mark out their positions. Most framers use a specially designed corner gauge. Figure 10. Corner gauges are marked with distances that are standard for mount decorating. It is best to mark the corners lightly with a fine pencil or pinhole. 2. Lining ink, watercolour paint or acrylic paint should be diluted to the desired colour with purified water. Purified water will not leave brown stains on paper as it dries. It is safest to always use this in mount decoration. If a drop of watercolour paint leaks onto the mount board, this can sometimes be washed out with purified water without leaving a watermark when dry. 3. If you are trying a new colour or mix of colours, be sure to test this on an offcut of mount board. 4. The nib of your ruling pen can be adjusted using a screw dial on the side to narrow or widen the width of the ruled line. On good quality pens, this dial is marked with a scale for calibration. 5. Your ruling pen should be loaded with ink using a small watercolour paintbrush. Practice is the only real way of discovering how much ink to use. If you overload the pen, the ink will form unwanted blobs, and if you underload it, you will need to stop midline to refill the pen. This too is likely to result in blobbing. If you do have to stop midline, start again at the point you left off. Do not go over what you have already done. 6. Draw your line with the aid of a framer's ruler. A ruler with 1 or more rubber strips along its underside is unlikely to move whilst being used. The gap created by the rubber strips can help to prevent colour bleed. V-grooves. A V-groove is probably one of the most common methods by which a window mount can be decorated, and the ability to cut a V-groove is necessary to pass the GCF exam. There are many hand-operated mount cutting machines on the market, but whichever one you have, the method is basically the same. The only exceptions to the rule would be mount cutters with a dedicated V-groove attachment or a computerized mount cutter. After calculating your window mount size, decide where the V-groove is to be placed. Most framers have their own ideas about this, but 10 to 25 mm from the inner bevel is typical. The V-groove is one method of decoration that is cut before the window mount borders. Method 1. Work out window mount measurements. 2. Decide on placement of V-groove. 3. Draw registration marks on the back of the mount board. Pencil marks on at least 2 sides will ensure the fallout goes back in place correctly. 4. Mark window mount border size on each side of the board and the V-groove size in brackets to avoid confusion. 5. Set the mount cutter stops to V-groove measurement and cut as for a normal window mount. 6. Turn the fallout face side up and using a hard lead pencil, measure 2 mm from one side and draw a light line. This is how much is going to be cut off the fallout to reverse the bevel. Figure 22. Seven. Using the slideway bar the cutting head is attached to and slides on your mount cutter, set the edge of the slideway approximately 1 mm to the right of the ruled line. For accuracy, you want the blade to touch the ruled line. 8. Once that is done, bring the left-hand guide so it touches the edge of the fallout's bevel and tighten it so it does not move. If your mount cutter hasn't got a dedicated V-groove stop, mark the position of the left-hand bar for future reference. 9. Cut each side of the fallout, taking off only a slight bit of board, just enough that the bevel is reversed. For best results, start the cut a few inches above the mount board and finish a few inches after the mount board. This helps eliminate ragged and dented corners of the reverse bevel. 10. Place the fallout face down and reposition the window mount, using the registration marks to align the fallout and window mount correctly. 11. Using a tape suitable for the appropriate framing level, stick the tape directly over the join and burnish with a spoon or burnishing bone. 12. Burnishing allows the fallout and the window mount to lie perfectly flat with no gaps. 13. Reset your mount cutter to the window aperture size and cut all 4 sides. Fillets. Fillets can be used around the aperture edge of a window mount. Using the same colour and style as the moulding can be an attractive way to give the frame a richer appearance. Fillets are generally made from timber or a synthetic material. Method 1. Cut the inner edges of the window mount reverse beveled. 2. Size and cut the fillets at an angle of 45 degrees, then check if they fit properly into the aperture of the window mount. 3. Attach the fillets to the reverse side of the window mount using an appropriate fixing method. 4. A conservation quality sealing tape and/or an extra window mount should be used as a barrier between the fillet and the artwork. Undermounts. The undermount should be the same overall size as the window mount and should be hinged to it with a continuous hinge along one of the long sides. In the case of a landscape shaped picture, this should be along the top edge, and for a portrait shaped picture, the hinge should be on the left side so that the window mount opens up like a book. The undermount should be made of mount board at least 1100 microns thick and consistent with the level of framing. Attaching artwork. Most artwork should be attached to the undermount with a T-hinge on the top edge, figure 23, made from suitable tape for the level of framing. T-hinges allow the work to expand and contract with humidity and temperature change. They are therefore less likely to cause the artwork to cockle than a continuous hinge or attaching the artwork at all 4 corners. Hinges should be attached to the back of the artwork and should overlap onto the artwork the minimum amount necessary to give proper support. 5mm to 8mm should be sufficient for most art on paper. The hinge should be the same paperweight or weaker than the artwork, not heavier, so that in the case of an accident, the hinge would tear, not the artwork. Other methods of attaching artwork include corner pockets, platform mount, and float hinges. These are not required for the GCF exam. At level 2 high-level framing and above, any method of attaching artwork must be reversible. At level 3 mid-level and below, dry mounting or pasting down is acceptable for easily replaceable artwork. Glazing. Glass. Glass must be cut to allow a clearance from the rebate of 1mm to 2mm. Having established the required measurement, score a line on one side of the glass, using either a wall-mounted cutter or a handheld cutter with a T-bar or metal ruler. After scoring, the glass should break along the score. Should it break slightly outside of the line in places, you can remove any unevenness with a pair of glass pliers. Before assembly, both sides of the glass should be cleaned with glass cleaner and a lint-free duster or microfiber cloth. A few hints when cutting glass. 1. If a score line is left for several hours, it becomes harder to break along it. It is best to break glass immediately after scoring. 2. The wheel will be damaged if you try to go along an existing score to deepen it. The glass is also likely to break unevenly, leaving a rough edge. 3. Glass is easier to cut when warm. It becomes brittle when cold. If glass is stored in a cold place, it should be brought to room temperature before cutting and handling. 4. When scoring, be sure to cut at the very top and bottom of the glass, otherwise a small jutting lip could appear. 5. Scoring should sound clean and smooth, with no roughness or crunchiness. 6. The whole length should be scored in one continuous action, using consistently even, light pressure. 7. If the edges of the glass are rubbed down with an abrasive glass pad, they are less likely to shave fragments of wood from the rebate, which may in turn get under the glass. Synthetic glazing. Most synthetic glazing is more easily scratched than glass, so is supplied with protective film on both sides. This should not be removed until just before the picture is assembled. Synthetic glazing is cut by scoring. If cutting by hand, knives with specially designed blades are available but not essential. Once sufficiently scored, the plastic can be broken by pressing it over the edge of the workbench and snapping it. Cutting plastic with a bench-end guillotine is not recommended. A ragged edge will result, lots of little plastic shards will be created, and you may damage the guillotine blade. Synthetic glazing can usually be ordered cut to size. Backboard. Backboard must be cut to allow a clearance of 2mm to 3mm. The backboard should drop easily into the rebate without any force being applied. Final assembly. The order in which individual framers prefer to assemble frames varies. However, it is important to check that the artwork is positioned correctly. Also check for dust, specks and fingerprints before securing the backboard. There is a wide choice of techniques for securing the backboard. The important thing is that the backboard is securely held in place and that your chosen method is designed for long-term use and will not gradually slip out of place. Because they are weaker by design, flexible points are not acceptable at level 3, mid-level framing and above. Sealing the backs of frames with quality tape. The purpose of sealing the back of picture frames is to keep out insects, dust and other unwanted contaminants. As mentioned in the materials section, the FSQC strongly recommend the use of gummed paper tape that is coated with a water-soluble adhesive. At level 3, mid-level framing and below, good quality self-adhesive tape is acceptable. Masking tape cellophane tape, and parcel tapes should never be used, as these are intended for short-term use. However, any tape can only achieve a lasting bond if it is properly applied. The following guidelines should be remembered. There should be no breaks in the tape. Gummed tape should be thoroughly dampened, otherwise air bubbles will form. Tape should be well pressed down to form a secure bond. The tape must stick to itself. Corners must overlap and not be mitered. The tape must be well pressed into the recess of the rebate with no bridges that can be easily torn. The final touch. Once the frame is complete and hanging fittings have been added, bumpers should be attached to the bottom two corners on the back of the frame. To allow air to circulate freely around the frame, these should be at least 3 mm thick, figure 24. Where practical, there should be a personalised label on the back of the frame, and it is useful to add the date, so that in future years people will know when the next inspection is due. Any original labels should also be attached to the backboard, as they can provide provenance for the artwork. If you agree to carry out a customer's request that goes against your recommendation, to dry mount a limited edition print for example, it is a good idea to put a signed disclaimer inside the frame before sealing up. Stretching or supporting and framing fabric art. A textile item will usually be supported over mount board or foam core of a suitable strength and appropriate framing level to remain flat when the artwork is tensioned. The tension should be sufficient to prevent the artwork sagging, but it should not pull it out of shape. If there is insufficient material available for stretching, it may be necessary to add extension strips of similar weight material to the edges, either by hand or machine sewing. GCF candidates must be able to stretch an item of fabric evenly over a support board. Although most fabric art is stitched, for the exam a piece of decorated fabric is acceptable. The fabric must be stretched so that the image is correctly positioned and framed to level 3, mid-level. If possible, the grain, warp and weft of the fabric should also be straight. Fabric art should always be folded at the corners. Under no circumstances should a framer trim fabric art without the customer's consent. When fabric art is presented for framing, the framer should check it carefully for missing stitches, puckering, imperfections and holes, dirt marks and mould. All these imperfections may be more noticeable after stretching and framing, so pointing these out to the customer before framing can minimize the possibility of dissatisfaction. Visibility of dark travelling stitches on a light coloured base cloth may be minimized by using a darker support board. Lightweight wadding between the artwork and support board may help disguise knots, puckering or bulky threads on the back. If travelling stitches, loose threads or knots are to be removed, this should be done by the customer. Framers are advised not to wash or attempt to clean fabric art. Cleaning of most fabrics should be referred to a textile conservator or a specialist dry cleaner. Modern embroidery kits, usually on Aida cloth, are generally washable. They can benefit from washing because oils and perspiration from the hands during stitching can develop over time into brownish stains on the usually pale base cloth. If the textile is to be washed, this should be done by the stitcher/customer. If fabric art requires pressing or steaming, this should also be done by the stitcher or customer. Pressing/steaming should always be done from the back and through a cloth or tissue paper. Ideally, pressing should be done on a cloth with pile, such as toweling, to minimize the risk of crushing the threads. Squaring/blocking. Some fabric art requires squaring, usually modern needlepoint, which will go out of square very easily while being stitched. Most framers use commercial squaring appliances, but squared boards with pegs or pins can be used. These are some common methods of stretching or supporting fabric. 1. Lacing is considered the best method of attaching any fabric which requires tensioning over a support board, as it is fully reversible. Figure 25. Use at level 1, ultimate level or below. 2. Tight fit is particularly suitable for silks or very fine materials which may show stress marks where tension is applied using lacing or pinning. Use at level 1, ultimate level or below. 3. Pinning. Figure 26. Use at level 2, high level or below. 4. Sewing fabric to support cloth or board can be used for items not suitable for stretching over a board, such as items of clothing, delicate items not strong enough for stretching, or decorated fabrics where the edges are to be seen. This method is not acceptable for the GCF exam, as candidates need to demonstrate their ability to stretch over a support board. Use at level 1, ultimate level or below. 5. Sticking edges of artwork to a support board. There are many methods of sticking textiles to a support board. However, none of these methods can be regarded as meeting anything other than level 4 low-level framing. Lacing. 1. Choose a support board that will not bend under the tension required for the fabric art. 2. Use a thread of slightly lesser strength than the base cloth of the textile, so that if for any reason there is excess tension between the thread and the thread will break rather than the fabric tear. 3. Position art and fix temporarily in position with pins in the side of the board or with soft pad clothes pegs. 4. Pull, but do not cut, a length of thread from the spool and, starting in one corner, lace the thread evenly from one side to the other so that the fabric art is tensioned sufficiently to keep it in place without unnecessary strain. Pull more thread off the spool as necessary and pull it through the stitching you have done so that the lacing is completed with one thread. This enables the tension to be adjusted as necessary. Secure both ends of the thread with small overstitching. 5. Repeat this lacing process between the other two sides. Tight fit. 1. Choose a board of sufficient thickness and quality for the level of framing being carried out. 2. Decide on the window mount aperture size and cut an aperture in the tight fit board that is slightly larger than this. This should be a straight, not a beveled cut. A beveled cut is more likely to damage a delicate textile. Remove the aperture fallout. 3. With a delicate fabric, such as a light silk, the art can be placed over the fallout. The outer board can then be pressed down on top and repositioned so that the fabric is kept in place. It can then be straightened and tensioned by adjusting the excess fabric at the back. 4. With thicker fabrics, it will be necessary to take a sliver of board off two sides of the fallout. Pinning. 1. Choose a suitable thickness mount board or foam core board and cut to size so that you can pull the fabric art over the edges. 2. Choose suitable pins. Small pins are available for lightweight work. Stainless steel or rustless brass pins must be used for level 2 high-level framing work and preferably also for lower levels. 3. Position with a pin in the edge of the support board at the center of each side. 4. Work out from the center of each side in turn, adjusting the tension as you go. 5. Fold corners neatly. Sewing fabric to support cloth or board. 1. Arrange the item in the required position and pin lightly to hold in place while stitching. 2. Stitch through the support sufficiently to prevent the item falling forwards and touching the glass when framed. Be careful not to stitch too tightly so that the fabric art is under strain. 3. Use a thread of slightly lesser strength than the fabric art so that, if for any reason there is excess tension between the thread and the The thread will break rather than the fabric tear. Framing fabric art. Stretched fabric art will be thicker than a piece of art on paper. If a window mount is to be used, it will be necessary to pack out around the art to keep the framing package stable. If this is not done, when the framer's points are inserted behind the backboard, it is likely that the window mount will be pushed down at the edges and a gap may appear between the window mount and artwork. The packing material must be suitable for the level of framing being carried out. These are made into a border around the art of the same thickness so that the window mount can be fully supported. This packing can be attached using double-sided tape up to level 2 high-level framing, but EVA adhesive or better must be used at level 1 ultimate level framing. This packing also supports the artwork and helps to keep it in position. As with art on paper, fabric art should not touch the glass. Spacers should be inserted for close framed items or if the window mount does not provide sufficient clearance. At level 2, high level framing and above, if the fabric art is to be close framed, the frame rebate edge should be sealed to prevent acids from wooden frames coming into contact with the artwork. Stretching and framing art on canvas. GCF candidates must be able to assemble timber stretcher bars securely to given measurements and of a strength suitable for each individual canvas. They must be able to stretch canvases evenly and to the correct tension and fix them securely to the stretcher bars. The image size of the canvas must be to specification and corners must be neatly folded and not cut. Before framing any canvas, the framer should check whether the tension needs adjusting and that the stretchers are properly squared. If the stretchers are inadequate and in need of replacing, or if the canvas needs restretching, the customer should be advised. Prints and photographs on canvas should be lightly tensioned and framed according to the same principles as oil paintings. However, framers are often presented with canvases that have never been stretched. Here are some guidelines on how to proceed. 1. Agree the desired image size and frame design with the customer. 2. Obtain stretcher bars of the correct size. These tend to come in standard sizes, although custom sizes can be made to order. Good quality stretcher bars have one rounded outside edge, which is designed to prevent bar marks appearing on the painting. 3. Once assembled, check that the corners are 90-degree angles, either using a set square or by measuring the diagonals, which should be equal. If the canvas is large or heavy, you may need to reinforce the strength of the stretcher frame by adding cross or brace bars. 4. Place the stretcher frame face up on the workbench and position the canvas onto it. Once the canvas is aligned correctly, lightly insert a pin or tack into the center of each side. These will hold the canvas in place while you turn it over onto a soft, clean towel and will be removed as the stretching progresses. 5. The canvas should be attached to the sides or the back of the stretcher frame using solid copper tacks or galvanized tacks that resist rusting, figure 27. Staples may be used providing they are galvanized or stainless steel. To prevent excess damage to the warp and weft of the canvas, staples should be inserted diagonally rather than parallel to the stretcher bars. Stretcher pliers are useful for getting a grip on the canvas and pulling it to the right tension. These specialist pliers have two wide, textured grips that hold the canvas securely as it is pulled. 6. The first 4 tacks should be placed at the center of each side. As you position these, discard the 4 temporary tacks. Most framers hold the stretcher frame upright as they tack so that they can see both sides and have maximum control over the position of the image and the tautness of the canvas. Check that you are happy with both the image position and the tautness before adding further tacks. If you are not happy, Then remove and replace one or more of the tacks. At this stage, you should also check that the stretcher frame is still square. 7. Continue adding tacks from opposite side to opposite side and from the center of each side outwards, pulling and stretching as you go. The distance between the tacks depends upon the size and weight of the canvas, and this generally varies between 20 mm and 50 mm. 8. To help with restretching in the future, corners and excess canvas must never be cut. Tack or staple either side of the stretcher bar mitre, but not across it. The mitre must be left unrestrained for possible future tensioning. Any excess canvas may have to be held down with a few tacks for neatness. 9. The canvas should be taut enough that it does not sag or bow, but not so tight that it is in danger of tearing or distorting. A little movement of the canvas must be allowed. If the back of the canvas is gently flicked with a finger, a soft note should be emitted, not a hard sounding note. 10. 2 wooden wedges should be inserted into each corner. Figure 28. These reinforce the square angle of the corners and are useful for retensioning the canvas, as it inevitably relaxes over time. Add the wedges to both long sides first and then the short sides. This helps prevent the stretcher frame assembly going out of square and corner rucks developing in the canvas. Gently tap the corner wedges into place using a pin hammer. This tightening process is often referred to as keying out. When keying out, it is a good idea to place a small square of mount board under each corner so that there is no danger of the hammer damaging the canvas. Most wedges have a 90-degree angle, a 70-degree angle and a 20-degree angle. The grain of the wood runs from the 90-degree angle along to the point. You should insert the wedge with the 90-degree angle projecting into the center of the canvas and the 70-degree angle beside the stretcher bar. The grain of the wood should run lengthways into the corner of the frame. In simple terms, the longest side of the wedge, which runs opposite the right angle, should lie against the stretcher bar. Framers often mistakenly put the short side against the stretcher bar. Wedges are more likely to split when tapped if they are inserted the wrong way. You should be tapping against the grain of the wood, not along it. Plywood and plastic wedges do not have a grain, so the above guidelines do not apply, but most quality wedges are made from hardwood. Hardwood wedges are strong and long-lasting. 11. The rebate size of the frame must be 3 to 6 mm larger than the stretched canvas on all 4 sides to allow for the eventual expansion of both wood and canvas. Sometimes inserting a slip can be useful to increase the size of the rebate lip. 12. There are various clips available for fastening stretched oils into their frames. Figure 29. Z-clips. One end of the Z has to be tapped into the frame's rebate with a hammer, and the rest of the Z folded back before the painting is inserted into the frame. The clip is then folded forward and the other end of the Z is lightly hammered into the back of the stretcher bar. The number of Z clips used depends upon the size of the painting. Care should be taken not to damage the sight edge of the frame, and using a small piece of card as protection will help. Spring clips are screwed into the frame and then turned round to overlap onto the painting and hold it in place. Offset clips are a very neat method of fixing. As per the illustration, figure 29, an offset clip is screwed to the back of the moulding with the offset lip holding the canvas in place. 13. Suitable hangers are fixed into the frame. To prevent any possible distortion of the stretcher bar assembly or canvas, hanging fittings should not be attached to the stretcher bars. As the canvas relaxes, the wedges sometimes fall out and slip between the canvas and the bottom stretcher bar, leaving imprints on the front of the canvas. To prevent this, the framer can make small holes in the wedges and then fix the wedges to the stretchers with thin wire or cord. Stretcher molding can also be bought in lengths for cutting to specific sizes. Some have a central channel into which a single right-angled triangular wedge can be inserted at each corner. Strainer bars have no facility for wedges to be inserted and need to be joined by pinning. For the GCF exam, candidates are required to use timber stretcher bars that require 2 wooden wedges at each corner.